Hey guys, what's up? Coach Jestyn with PNWBJJ, and I'm super excited about today's episode. I've got my jiu-jitsu instructor, someone I consider my mentor and close personal friend for the last 20 years, Professor James 300 Foster. Thank you for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
Has it been that long?
It's been that long.
Yeah.
Goes by
That explains some of the gray.
Yeah, right. Really looking forward to what you have to show us today.
Yes.
But can you say a word or two about kind of your origin story or what brought you to jiu-jitsu? And
Yeah, definitely. Origin story of James 300 Foster. So I was always into martial arts. When I was a kid, I would watch all the weekend kung fu movies and those kind of things, and I always wanted to do martial arts. Like when I was really young, like I think 4 or 5, like the neighborhood kid, he had like throwing stars and nunchucks, and like he had climbing claws. I don't know where he was getting this stuff, but we would play all around the neighborhood, a little ninja stuff and doing all of that, and I always wanted to train, and I would beg my parents, like, please, I want to do martial arts, and they're like, yeah, kind of put it off a little bit. And then when the first Karate Kid movie came out, that was kind of when they saw like, oh, anti-bullying and all of that. So I was getting bullied pretty bad in preschool of all things, like kindergarten and like that level, because I was always so much bigger than the other kids. So the recess game was how many kids it took to get me on the ground and beat me up. Jeez. So that was kind of like a daily thing at school. So my parents were very, concerned about the bullying and everything, and the schools weren't really doing much about it. So I think that combined with seeing the Karate Kid and kind of that message, even though they kind of turned it around to where, some of the memes where he was actually, Daniel LaRusso was actually the bully, right. Which is a great twist. So they saw the benefits of that and got me into karate when I was 10. So I did a style of karate called Jitsu, which is like American karate, but it was more like Jeet Kune Do. The motto was, if it works, we use it. And that was until BJJ got popular, and they did not like BJJ. They didn't like the fact that somebody who'd been dabbling in jiu-jitsu could take them to the ground and choke them out or arm lock them relatively easy, even with all the karate kicks and things that we were taught to do. But I trained there. I did karate for almost 10 years, and like the origin story of a lot of other BJJ practitioners from my era back in the early to mid 90s, we saw Royce Gracie in the UFC. So when I saw Royce Gracie in the UFC, I was already a black belt in karate, and I was like, I want to know what that guy's doing. How's he doing that? This seems like really effective. I want to know what to do if I end up on the ground with somebody. The style I trained in, it was very much a limited contact when we would spar. And you always had in the back of your brain, in a real situation, am I going to pull my punch? Am I going to pull my kick? Am I really going to follow through? Because we practice no contact or light contact. You could see in the UFC what was working and what wasn't. So that was like a really big eye-opener for me, and I think many other people around the world. When we saw Royce doing that, he wasn't a huge guy. He was in there, submitting bigger people, and it was shown to be very effective. So for me, that was the point where I started dabbling. So I've been doing jiu-jitsu with formal training for over 28 years now, but I've been messing around and dabbling in jiu-jitsu for about 30 years. Wow. Yeah, 30 years, maybe a little more than 30 years. Because after that first UFC, which I believe was in 93, me and some of the other karate black belts were getting together in off hours, reviewing bootleg VHS recordings that people had got from their pirate cable boxes. Sure. We would try to reverse engineer, like, how was he doing the Ezekiel choke? How was he doing the arm bar? And we would get together and practice and do jiu-jitsu way back in like 93, 94. And then there came a point where I knew I wanted to branch out and also do jiu-jitsu. It was always my intention to continue doing karate and continue training there, but also go and pay to learn jiu-jitsu and then bring that back to the karate school because the motto was, if it works, we use it. Because we did stuff from judo, we did stuff from taekwondo, kung fu, everything that was supposed to be the whole basis of the style was, if it works, we use it. We use everything, the best techniques from every style. So I offered at the time to go and pay to learn jiu-jitsu from Marcelo Alonso, who was the only academy here in Washington State at the time with a legitimate Brazilian black belt running the academy. And I was told that jiu-jitsu was a fad, like kung fu was in the 70s, and then it would be gone after a couple of years. You'll never hear about it. And this is after them seeing it in the UFC, seeing how effective, and it's not like it's this unknown, unproven thing at that point. And I was told, if you want to go do jiu-jitsu, you can do that, but you can't come back here. So basically, you have to choose between your family here at the karate school that you've been with for almost 10 years, or go learn this BJJ thing. And so, as a young man, I made the decision. I wrote this letter and about how I was being forced into making this choice, and really didn't want to, really wanted to do both, because I was offering to go pay and learn it, bring it back, teach it there. But I was told, nope, if you go do that, you might as well not come back. So from that point, my life branched, and I've been doing BJJ ever since. Yeah.
And that's when you started running an academy then?
No. So that's when I officially started doing jiu-jitsu. So that would have been in '96 was when I officially started training under an instructor, became officially ranked in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, trained through second degree white belt with Marcelo Alonso, and then there was a lot of changes as far as owners and instructors that came in and all of that. But that was when I first started training officially, was in '96. And then around 2002, 2003 was when I started teaching jiu-jitsu officially.
Okay.
Yeah, so over 21 years of teaching full-time now.
And coaching, wow.
And coaching, yes.
Yeah, that's a little bit.
Little
That's
while.
some experience.
Yes.
Well, so, and then at that point, when you decided to make that move to be a teacher or a school owner, what drove that? Because at that time, and this is pre-Stephan Bonner or Forrest Griffin's fight that elevated the UFC into what it is, that, jiu-jitsu was still kind of niche. It wasn't as well known.
Very niche, yeah.
So rather than, go the competitor route or just being a practitioner of jiu-jitsu, what made you want to open up a school and sort of fueled that decision?
So the funny part about that is it wasn't really a conscious decision on my part. And oddly enough, just in life, how this happens many times throughout your life, you'll notice things come full circle, like things will come back around. So oddly enough, around the time that I started teaching, just prior to that, the school that I was training at, that I was a purple belt under, they moved really far away. So I was already driving an hour and a half each direction, so 3 hours round trip to train there. And then they moved like another almost hour away. And I had told them, guys, I can't, I'm not gonna be able to follow you up there, it's too far. And they said, we figured we lose some people. So I was like, okay, well. Then I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a home gym. I was scrambling to figure out what I was going to do, how I was going to continue training. Because back then there was a handful of schools. There would really be 1 or 2 schools open at once, and that's where you trained. Like that one place, that's where you trained. So you didn't have a place every 5 minutes, drive 5 minutes, you have another jiu-jitsu school nowadays. Back then there'd be 1 or 2 places in the entire state. And so when they moved further away, it's like, man, what am I gonna do? I can't train anymore. I'm gonna have to invite my friends over, train in the garage. I had a fold out mat. I did that for a little bit. But around that time, the new owner of the karate school that I used to train at, who was also a student there at the time, he became the owner, and he reached out to me because it was in the early days of MMA here in Washington State, where it was only allowed on Indian reservations. Muckleshoot would do some fights and things, and So he reached out and said, "Hey James, I don't know if you remember me. We trained together back in the day. I own the karate school, the American Colleges of Karate. I own that now. I have some guys who are wanting to do MMA, and they've done some fights. But they do great until it ends up on the ground, and then they really have trouble. I was wondering if you would come and give back to your old alumni, your old affiliation, whatever you want to call it. You'd like to come back, give to your family that you trained with back in the day, and show us some BJJ and maybe teach a little BJJ." So I was like, sure, I'll come back and show you guys some stuff, help out the fighters. And that's how it started. There was no money involved. I wasn't getting paid to teach. I was just doing it because I wanted to give back to my old team, and started once or twice a week going and teaching those guys. So a lot of those people still train with me. Trevin, Jeff Bourgeois, all of those guys, like they still do BJJ or black belts in Jiu-Jitsu. Those were all people I was teaching who had interest in being MMA fighters at the time. And so I would go in, I would show them some stuff, and then slowly it started to be where other people were seeing, and they go, "Oh, I want to learn. Like, can I come to the jiu-jitsu class too?" "Oh, sure." Ask the instructor, like, "Okay, how much does it cost?" "Oh, well, I hadn't really thought about that." "Well, $35 a month." "Okay." So then it just snowballed from there.
Wow. And so it really just developed organically, and you kind of fell into it.
Yeah, and it was literally the entire mat space, or it was carpet. There was no mats.
Oh, man.
So we were training on white carpet, which is the absolute worst. If there's a chance of getting scraped and bleeding, they would freak out if you got blood on the white carpet. It's like, why do you guys have white carpet? They make you run and get the peroxide and put it on there real quick. But yeah, it was literally not much bigger than this mat that we're sitting here on. The entire place was not much bigger than that.
Wow.
And so we started there. They branched out and opened up a bigger location in Auburn that was very, very big in comparison. And they actually, in around 2003, I believe is when that started, and they let me use one half of the school and have my two 20 by 20 wrestling mats in there. And then continued teaching, continued growing my team, my student base. And then I had the goal of getting it to the point of being able to open my own location and not be teaching out of somebody else's martial arts school. And 2007 is when that occurred. And I had a very small school. We outgrew it in the first year. We were in a 3-year lease. They're like, "Oh no, we outgrew it in the first year." Well, good problem to have. Added a bunch more classes, made it through the 3 years. And then in 2010, that's when we got into this much bigger location, now going on 14 years ago.
Man, 14 years here. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So we've both been training a long time. You know, you have been
Absolutely,
training longer than I have.
yes.
And obviously you've been training at a higher level and far more consistently. But I think we both agree there's been a lot of changes in jiu-jitsu over the last, say, 30 years.
Definitely.
Like for instance, one of the things that I see is there's like a current meta that's very different than the late 90s, and that there's like an emphasis maybe on a kind of hyper athletic, no-gi, leg lock and leg entanglement game, as opposed to like say the late 90s where it was more gi oriented, upper body submissions, chokes, arm bars, and guard passing as the game.
Yeah, a little more specialized right now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and things kind of evolve and go up and down. But from your perspective, what are some of the ways that you've seen jiu-jitsu change, whether it's in its popularity or its accessibility or techniques that come and go, or just your own observations? How do you see jiu-jitsu having changed over the last 3 years?
Well, jiu-jitsu's evolved a lot in that there's a lot more information available, a lot more access to instructional material. I remember back when I was starting, there was nothing. There was literally one book where it was spelled the same way, Jiu, Jitsu, all right? Not the Japanese Jitsu, and it was a guy in a black tank top with a big gold chain. This guy that looked like he was straight out of Brooklyn, New York or something. And we had this book, and it showed some grappling, some jiu-jitsu moves, and then there was the Craig Kukuk had the VHS tape series that I couldn't afford. It was like this big, like 12 VHS tape series. Like that was pretty much all there was back then. Now we have much wider access to free instructional information, and the instruction that people receive at jiu-jitsu academies is of a higher caliber. Back then, we were subject to training with instructors a lot of times that were fresh off the plane from Brazil, who didn't speak a lot of English, which, hey, we were happy we were training with the actual Brazilian, learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from them. So a lot of it, you had to be very observational and interpret what they were trying to say versus what they were showing.
Sure.
Okay, which I think there's some benefits to that. I think made you really focus on actually seeing the details, whereas now it's all laid out for us. Sometimes we don't have to do as much work up here to pick things up. So I do think it helped in the ability to observe and really understand how techniques worked. But at the same time, the techniques we were being taught back then were very remedial in comparison to what we have available to us now. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because while we have a lot more information, it's already overwhelming as a new student to jiu-jitsu. What should I work on? And then you go on YouTube or Instagram, and you could literally sit on there for 3 years watching nonstop and never run out of techniques, right? And with that comes a lot of distractions, a lot of instant dopamine hits, and not really spending the time to perfect any one area of your game. So obviously the popularity of jiu-jitsu has skyrocketed, but for me, like, the access to quality training, the access to quality instructional footage and all these resources, it's a major change. Like, that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen over the years, and it's both good and bad, in my opinion.
No, I could see that for sure. Yeah. Well, something you said kind of resonates with me. I mean, both as a student and as somebody who's trying to teach jiu-jitsu, it seems like it's challenging because it's so limitless, right? It's kind of amorphous. In the older styles of karate or kung fu, there's typically like a finite set of these are the katas you have to master, these are the moves, and you just progress through those. But this, it's hard to
a lot of this is the way versus this is a way.
Yeah.
Right? Jiu-jitsu is very much, hey, this is a variation of how you can do this, but there's 50 other ways you can accomplish this one thing.
Sure.
Karate, some of these other styles, like, here's how we do a side kick. This is the right way to do a side kick. This is the only way to do a side kick. This is the best way to do a side kick. Jiu-jitsu is very, very open. And that's why jiu-jitsu continues to evolve. And this is how somebody like myself can be doing it for over 28 years or 30 years if we count the informal training, and still learn and evolve after all this time. I pick up new details, new things all the time. And that's very unique to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I don't think you see that in a lot of other styles.
I agree. No, that is awesome. Well, okay, and that's a good segue point then, because I like to ask this question to anybody who comes onto the channel to teach stuff. And I'm sure you run across this question daily running the school, but if you have somebody who's at the start of their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu journey, what sort of wisdom or things would you impart to that person to help them along? Because it's tough. I mean,
it's tough.
It's a tough thing to learn.
I think the biggest stumbling block that a new jiu-jitsu practitioner faces is there's a couple very common ones. There's going to be the whole comparing yourself to other people. comparing yourself to the other student that started approximately the same time that you did. And you see them in the class and you remember, oh, we were both there on our first day. And then maybe you're seeing them progress quicker, whether that be rank or just their skill level, and you're struggling. You know, there's the old adage, comparison is the thief of joy, right? That's very applicable to jiu-jitsu and many other things. So I see it all the time where somebody's beating themselves up because they're not doing as good as their peer. Maybe they're not learning as fast or they're not progressing as quickly as they feel they should be. And I always tell those people to pull back, ask yourself, do I know more jiu-jitsu than I did on the very first day I came in? Well, yeah, of course I do. I know more. Okay, do I know more than a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago? Well, yeah, I've learned more since then. Okay, you're doing good. That's like your recalibration, okay? You compare yourself to another person, it's a false metric because you don't know, as far as your brain, they're there when you're there. In your head, oh, I saw Jestyn today, he was at class, and then I think you're not doing anything other than when I'm at class again. They don't realize that other person they're comparing themselves to, maybe they're training 3 times a day. Maybe, you know, you're training 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and they're in here 3 times a day, 4 days a week. Yet, perception is reality, so you go, oh, well, they're only here when I'm here. No, you're comparing yourself to somebody who is here all the time. But you don't realize that because in your reality, oh yeah, so-and-so's at class the days I go. Like, no, they're here way more, buddy. And everybody learns differently.
Sure.
Some people just learn way quicker. Some people are naturals. So again, there's so many factors that give us a false sense of how we are doing in comparison to others that most people don't take the time to consider. So I think slowing down, pulling out the picture, like really zooming out and going, okay, how am I doing compared to when I started is a really big thing that I encourage everybody to do. Don't compare yourself to others, okay? There's so much to think about when you start training. It can be very overwhelming. For a new person, focus on defense, focus on escapes, right? Survival and escapes are like the number one. Sure. You're gonna be there a lot.
Yeah.
You start jiu-jitsu, you're gonna end up there a lot. You're gonna be in bad spots, okay? And the other thing is pace yourself. Like, be kind to yourself. It's very much I know it's a cliche thing to say, but it's very much a marathon compared to a sprint. People need to adjust their expectations and take their time and realize that consistency is the biggest thing. Literally, if you can only come in once a week or once every other week, if you're doing that week in and week out, you will get better. Okay? I would argue that that's more important than coming in a lot for a period of time and then taking 3 weeks off and then coming back, hitting it hard and fast and heavy and going and going and going and killing yourself and then, oh, I got to take a break again. Like, I would say the old tortoise versus the hare,
Sure,
like
sure.
Slow and steady, like that's the proper approach. And for individuals who come into this that like to do extracurricular conditioning, maybe they're already an athlete, they're somebody that works out or something, I always say, like, taper that down, make a little bit of time for this, give yourself a few months where you scale back your extracurricular conditioning and things that you do, let your body adapt to the demands of jiu-jitsu. We work all sorts of weird parts of our body that you don't normally work in other things, and also from a mental absorption standpoint. Like, if you're coming in too much, it can actually be of detriment to your training because you can only absorb so much new information.
Sure, no, that makes a lot of
So
sense.
there's a lot of the stumbling blocks and hurdles that a new person faces in jiu-jitsu.
Okay, no, that's beautiful. That makes a lot of sense to me. Well, and then a specialized version of that, For the bigger guys out there, bigger people out there, say you're over 6'3" and over 250 pounds. If you're starting
I don't
jiu-jitsu,
know anything about that.
no, can't relate.
I'm just a big guy that identifies as a little guy.
That's right.
Yeah.
But for those people who can come in and they have a certain amount of physicality, they can just
Yes.
bulldoze a lot of opponents. How do they, or what would you say to them to facilitate them getting better, faster?
Yeah, well, that's really tempting to do if you are big and strong and you can do that. It's like instant gratification, right? And you can come in and roll and feel good about yourself right out the gate because you're being competitive with some people. But what you have to realize is there's a point where that changes. There's a point where there's going to be a time where you end up on the bottom. You end up in bad spots. So what I tell people who are coming in with those attributes and who do have the ability to do that is you're always going to be naturally good at that. So what's it hurt if we take some time for you to work the opposite end of the spectrum and work off your back, work your guard, work from bad spots. Like, let's get that sharp and then come back to that other stuff that you're already naturally gravitating towards. To me, that's the best way in the long term for somebody like that to train and make sure they don't develop deficiencies in their technique that get exposed later on when they are with somebody who does not get overwhelmed by the size and strength. Because we've all seen that happen, right?
Sure.
Like, there comes a point where all of a sudden that stuff doesn't work and it's like, oh no, I don't know jiu-jitsu anymore. Like, no, it's not that you don't know jiu-jitsu, it's just you've gotten a false perspective on how jiu-jitsu works. You've gotten away with some things. I see it a lot of times when you'll roll with a visitor, they come from the school where they're the biggest person.
Sure.
And you can't help it that you're the biggest person at your school. Like, you got the people to train with that you have to train with, right? But they'll come in and they'll be a higher level person, like a black belt or like a purple brown, and they'll be like, man, none of my moves worked when I rolled with you, or when I was rolling with your upper belts, none of my stuff I normally do works. And it's like, well, it's because some of that you've developed habits working with the people that you've been working with that gave you a false sense of where you were at with your technique, or allowed you to develop some bad habits that just are getting exposed because people in here are used to rolling with bigger people. They have a bigger coach. They kind of know and understand how to negate a lot of those things in that game. So it can be difficult. Like, being the big person, you very much have to be willing to put yourself in bad spots. If your peers, if your training partners aren't able to put you there, you have to put yourself there and force yourself to work in those situations.
Got it. All right, so big guys, you heard that, right? Start under side mount.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't just start under side mount. Start under side mount or side control, whatever your academy calls it. And if you are able to, like, bench press the person and throw them across the room, don't, because that's not going to work with somebody your size or bigger. So keep yourself honest on your technique. Go, okay, would this work if the person was 100 pounds heavier? I probably couldn't bench press. Okay, I'm going to do this instead.
No, that's great advice. Well, okay, two last questions, and these are more like of a selfish inception as far as the questions. But to pull back the curtain on something that a lot of students wonder about, and I wonder about this particular facet a lot. For coaches, when you're looking at ranking people or progressing people through the ranks, there's so many people, so many different skill sets or physicalities or just abilities. So if you have somebody who's in their mid 60s and is doing this purely as a can I still stay active type of thing, versus a collegiate wrestler who's or prior collegiate wrestler who's 25 versus somebody who did judo for 15 years or something at a high competitive level, how do you manage?
Yeah, you can't grade them on the same scale, right? Like, there's too many different types of people that do jiu-jitsu to have a singular way of doing promotions. Like, you came to X amount of classes, you get a stripe. And like you were saying, somebody older, if you're grading based off of competition or physicality, they may not ever become whatever rank that you're thinking of putting them to. If just being tough is our metric and having to be able to compete with people of our peer level to be any given rank, like most of us would still be white belts. Like there's always somebody tougher and better and more skilled and more physical. So I find that you have to base it on the individual and their individual journey. So some people, they like to compete more. Those people get graded different than people who don't compete. Like promotions is one of the singular most like hard things to do. As you're already noticing now that you're running a school.
Already run into that.
Yeah, there's no one perfect answer to be able to grade everybody on the same scale. Okay, so I base it off of a few different things that are kind of my guidelines. Okay, I look at how consistent somebody's being. I look at, are they able to actually apply the things that they're learning during sparring from time to time. Like not on everybody, they don't have to be able to pull it off on everybody, but are they actually translating the techniques that they're drilling? Are they pulling some of those off during sparring with a resisting person? Okay, they're being consistent, they're coming to class. Like they're not like once every 3 weeks. Like it can be very hard for somebody to gain rank with me who is inconsistent. Or consistent for a period of time and then disappear for 6 months and then come. Like you're pretty much going to start over on that process. You're like, I'm going to start looking at you again once you've been consistent again. Looking at how they are handling adversity, right? Are they mentally mature enough to be ready for that next level? Are they just trying to play their A game and win every role, quote unquote win, or are they trying to help their training partner get better too? Is it a one-sided conversation when they roll, or is it a back and forth conversation? Okay, I do think that looking at attendance from the perspective of a marker for you to start looking at that person and making sure, if you haven't already, to be assessing them and going, okay, are they where they need to be for that next level, is helpful.
Got it.
Yeah, so for me, after about a lot of times like 50 classes is like my, okay, if I haven't already looked at this person and seen where they're at and rolled with them and see if they're where they need to be for that next level, I need to do that. Because it's easier when your school is small.
Sure.
It becomes increasingly hard the more and more students you have to do that. So you have to find that balance. But I find that having the ability to run reports and check attendance and make sure, even though we don't grade based off of attendance, it's my metric for going, okay, oh man, they've come to 100 classes and I haven't checked. Like, oh, I forgot. Like, it happens, and you don't want people who've been dedicated and putting in that work to slip through the cracks and feel underappreciated, right? Like, sure. In a perfect world, we would all just be happy to train and see our skills improve and not need any rank, but that's just not how our brains work.
Sure.
We need to look down and go, oh, validation.
Right.
I got a stripe. That means coach thinks I'm doing good. And then it does carry a lot of weight. Even a little piece of tape on the belt, it is important. It does carry weight. So you have to be very careful that, again, going back to what I said before, the students comparing themselves, or another stumbling block I see is students focusing too much on rank being a goal. Oh, my goal is to get to blue belt. My goal is to get to blue belt, coach. Okay, well, then what? You get to blue belt, and then is the next belt the goal? Like, what's the goal? Like, for me, the goal has always been a complete understanding and mastery of jiu-jitsu. that's a very lofty goal. It's an unattainable goal. But if I put that goal to myself, I know I'm going to continue forever because it's impossible, right? My goal has never been a specific rank, but it does feel good. You look down, you go, oh, that's a lot of years. Like,
It's kind of nice.
I'd lie to you if I didn't say it was exciting that I was coming up on my 5th degree. Like, I mean, it means a lot. It shows I've continued training. And for people who don't understand how it works as far as rank once you become a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, it's time put in actively teaching and training after you receive your black belt. That's what the stripes are based off of. So there's no, like, your instructor seeing if they think you're ready. It's, have you been training and teaching this whole time, all these years in between stripes? Okay, now's your next stripe. So it's 9 years total to get to 3rd degree, so 3 years per stripe, and then it switches to every 5 years. So once you hit your 3rd degree and you're 9 years in, then it's another 5 years before 4th, another 5 years before 5th, and so on and so on and so on. So yeah, it feels good, like having that. But the goal is not the rank or the belt for me. It's refining my skills, perfecting areas of my game that have weaknesses, working on being a better instructor. All of these are things that I'm personally trying to achieve. So I think for the students coming in, being consistent, realizing that your instructor, if you're training at a good school, you feel you're training at a good school, you like what they're about, your instructor has your best interest in mind. Let your instructor be the one that's stressed out, because believe me, we are. It's very stressful worrying about promotions. Let your instructor carry that weight. They have your best interest in mind, and feel assured in that they will put you to a rank that you have earned and that you are deserving of. And to me, in my experience, it's much worse to get a rank too quickly than it is to have it take longer.
Sure.
In my experience and information gathering and talking with people who come to me, like, who don't feel that they were given their black belt too quickly, and now what do I do? Like, I'm getting tapped by blue belts all the time. I don't feel like I'm to me, that brings up a lot more stress.
Sure.
Than, oh man, I've been a blue belt for 4 years. Like, it's frustrating, but having the skills and the knowledge of whatever belt is the priority, in my opinion.
No, I agree. That's well said. Okay, well then one final question, again from a selfish place here. If somebody is thinking about opening up a school or becoming an academy owner and teacher, what advice would you give to that person? How could you set them up for success, or they set themselves up for success?
So the first thing I tell any one of my students who comes to me that expresses an interest in teaching full-time and having their own academy is, first they have to accept the fact that it's going to be like 100x harder than they think it's going to be. So there's so much more to this than just having mats and having a space and having the ability to teach. Okay, a lot of what we do as instructors is managing personalities, managing a positive training environment, and that takes work. Okay, like if it was just showing up and teaching, very easy.
Okay.
But the business side, running things and all of that, that's a lot harder than people realize. And if you're an instructor who values your training environment, values providing a positive training environment for all different individuals, you have to very actively be addressing issues as they come up. And that can be very stressful. So stressful to the point that I've seen hundreds of instructors over the years lose their schools to problems because they weren't addressed right out the gate, and they just festered and festered and festered to the point of being out of control. So that little amount of stress, or that relative uncomfortability in the short term of having those conversations and addressing those problems right out the gate, saves so many headaches down the road. So aside from that, I would say that trying to incur as little debt as possible when you start your school, definitely beneficial. Okay, not taking out a bunch of huge loans, like being willing to start maybe within somebody else's space and grow your program until you've saved up enough money to be able to find a spot. And then one of the most important ones of all, starting in a small spot. Not wanting to have the grandiose, huge gym for your first gym, because I've seen so many of those fail. It's like, we got the mats, we got the giant 8,000 square foot spot, like right for the foot, and then, opening day, we don't have any students. Oh, we're not gonna be able to make rent. What's going on? Oh, the power bill's a lot more higher than I thought. Like, and then you're in this big spot and you're constantly fighting to break even, fighting to be able to make the bills each month. And I've seen that put a lot of places under when they start too quickly. So I always say, start in a place that's smaller than what you think you need. Be like me. Outgrow it in the first year. Have to add a bunch of classes to make it through your 3-year lease or whatever. But then at that point, you're going to be ready to move into that bigger spot, and you're going to actually have the student base to be able to facilitate that, as opposed to being fretting about the rent every month and the bills and everything else. I think trying to save up ahead if you can, to where you have 3 to 6 months of rent in savings before you get that big place, also beneficial. Then if you do get in there and things are struggling at first, you're like, oh, I've got 6 months to figure it out. Like, I have the rent covered and the bills covered for 6 months. But that takes patience, because a lot of people just want to jump right into it. And they go, I want to open my school now. I don't want to wait till I have that money saved. Oh, I'm going to do a loan, and then they're paying off loans for the next 20 years too. Like, it's what people realize. A lot of these gyms, when you see them, they're grandiose. Those people did not do it all on their own. Sure. There was financial backing, there was loans, there's all sorts of things behind the scenes that you don't see that make that a possibility, right? So if you're comparing yourself to that when you're trying to open your first place, you're getting a false metric. So take your time, take it slow, start small. It will grow. It just takes time, but it'll last. And that's the main thing. Most schools, most businesses end after the first year or two. If you make it past 2 or 3 years with your jiu-jitsu school, you're doing amazing.
Aces. All right.
Awesome.
Awesome stuff, man. Thank you so much.
My
Let's look at
pleasure.
some technique. All right.